Welcome, everyone, to our thought leadership series, 5 by 5s. You're going to hear from fast-paced sessions where our sponsors are going to introduce you to ideas and industry topics. Well, you're going to want to keep your notepad ready. And let's kick off now hearing from Jeff Farrell from NSF International, talking about professionalism and auditing. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you very much. So welcome everyone to SQF Unites 5 by 5. The topic that I've chosen today is professionalism in auditing. Next slide. So let's start at the beginning. What is professionalism? What is the expectation of professionalism? It's the conduct, competence, and qualities that characterize a professional or professional person. So we're really going to key in on that conduct, that competence, and those qualities in this session. Next slide. So some of the traits that we're looking for in professionals or within professionalism is appearance. Neat, tidy, well-groomed, someone who's together. This applies to both the facility and the auditor as well. Organization, so this is one that's critical to everything that we do from a facility side and from an audit management side as well. Auditors need to be organized. Facilities need to be organized. They need to be able to manage their time to ensure that the audit experience is a positive one. Competence, strive to be an expert in your field. So be competent, be careful, become an expert in everything that you do. And that's from a facility and an auditor. Accountability, so be accountable for your actions. Be reliable, reliability, be counted on to do the job. Be counted on to complete the audit within the time. Be counted on to present your SQF system to the auditor. Reliability. Demeanor. So this one is very important. It should reflect confidence, but not overconfidence. It should be polite. We don't want to see anybody talking down to one another, threatening at all. So demeanor is very, very important. And that really leads to poise. So poise in an audit is vital to everything that we do. Always maintain poise no matter what the situation. So as an auditor, you're a lone wolf out there. You're automatically outnumbered at the facility, but it's very important that you maintain poise at all times. And the flip side of that, is the facility. I understand that you've put your heart and soul into developing this program. A non-conformance only makes you better. It makes your program stronger. So always maintain poise in all situations. Next slide, please. Some of the characteristics we're looking at, and this is very important. So commitment and confidence. So acting professionally and confident in all of your interactions. So interactions with the employees on the floor, interactions, with the QA managers, with the supervisors, with the CEO. So making sure that we're acting professionally in all of our interactions. Responsibility and dependability. So making sure that you're responsible and fair in all of your work activities. Ethics and honesty. Walking the walk every single day at work, ensuring that you're following those legal, those ethical, and those honest intent in all of your interactions. Appearance and professional presence. So ensuring that you have proper hygiene throughout the facility, an auditor, friendly smile, eye contact. So making sure that you're doing all of these great things to ensure that the audit experience is a positive one, and more importantly, a professional one as well. Next slide. So let's compare the two. Let's look at both the food safety auditor and the facility site. So commitment, confidence. From an auditor perspective, making sure they understand the code and auditing to the SQF code, staying within the code. The facility side of that is understanding the SQF code, the SQF system that you built, and the intent of each of these programs, and challenging an auditor if necessary on where does that show up in the code? Can you show me where that doesn't meet the code requirements? Responsibility, dependability. So auditing to the intent of the code, being responsible and dependable on understanding that. And the flip side of that, the facility, the site, making sure that your system is built to the intent of the code, that you understand what that is, that you're questioning that as you're building your system and spreading it throughout your facility. And then the last one, ethics and intent. This is really kind of, you want to be ethical, honest, and audit to the intent of the code, friendly eye contact, and that goes for both sides, the facility as well as the the food safety auditor. Next slide, please. So some final thoughts. Professionalism encompasses behavior, appearance, workplace ethics, and helps to deliver a credible, reliable audit experience. Our main goal is to produce safe, quality food. Thank you very much.
Well done, Jeff. Thank you so much for chatting about professionalism. And next, let's hear from Tim Ryan of SGS North America with his session on how to protect your brand with supplier risk management. Take it away, Tim.
Thank you, Rachel. Good afternoon and maybe morning to all. Thank you for joining us for this 5x5 session. Again, my name is Tim Ryan. I'm the Vice President of Sales for SGS Knowledge Solutions in North America. Next slide, please. All right, the supply chain. All right, so even if you haven't been paying attention, you've probably heard a lot about supply chain in the last 6 months and maybe a year. So supply chain's been a particular problem for manufacturers in the U.S. And actually North America, Mexico as well, mainly because of the main ports in Long Beach and Los Angeles being backed up for weeks, where there used to be a very short turnaround. So everybody's been in sort of a maintain mode. Me personally, I would prefer to go back to the days when people were pre-pandemic days, when people were mostly concerned around the issues of brand. And as you can see in this slide, there's a whole lot of areas and solutions along the value chain, all the way from primary production to the retail space. So essentially farm to fork. Next slide, please. All right, if you talk about some of the areas of risk, so areas of risk would include environmental sustainability, social accountability, what SGS calls ESG, as well as occupational health and safety, which is pretty straightforward in an industrial or food manufacturing environment, and also security. And when we think of security, we really ought to be thinking about all the aspects around security. So there's not just physical security. There's also information security. Lots of news stories about people that lose access to their data and their systems. Me personally was affected by the Colonial Pipeline shutdown, where basically a ransomware put down a gasoline and fuel pipeline on the east coast of the U.S. That pipeline happens to run pretty close by where I live in Richmond, Virginia, but great impact to much of the East Coast, Mid-Atlantic, and Northeast. Next slide, please. If you look at SGS, what we like to think is we make a difference, right? We're the #1 global leader with offices in 80 countries. We have a high level of quality of service. We get very high marks from our client base, and we have a global and local experts partnering for industry and regulatory associations. Next slide, please. All right, let's talk about some of the solutions. So most people, if they look at their supply chain, there's lots of risk, but also lots of help available to you. So from a supply chain risk standpoint, you may look at things as simple as you see risk in some key suppliers, and you may just want some help auditing those. You may turn to a company like SGS with a global footprint and with the expertise to essentially audit anywhere in the world. So you can try to control those audits yourself and have your own internal team, or you can count on an organization like SGS to help you. There's training available. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Advisory, custom advisory services to just about any area you would need within the food industry. And then supply chain, which is where most of the risk is. And if you think about supply chain, you can make a big name for yourself in brand, or you can make a big negative name for yourself in brand, either positive or negative. And I'll read you just a couple of headlines, And you choose which one of these headlines you want your company measured in. So 35 companies with powerful social media impacts, or 10 major clothing brands caught in a shocking sweatshop scandal. So those are two of the extremes you can be on. Next slide, please. Okay, to wrap up, just one plug for training. Most people forget that competency is part of just about any standard you're trying to achieve compliance with. And all competency really starts with training. So it's a combination of training and experience. So please don't forget about training as early in your certification process as you would possibly be available for it. All right, that's what I had today. Thank you for joining this session. And please contact me with any questions or comments. Thank you. Rachel?
Bravo, Tim. And thanks. Are you all loving these 5x5s or what? I'm like, Tim, I think I know which headline. Good examples. And let's keep the fun rolling with our next session entitled Proficiency Testing. What is it and why you need it, with our speaker, Jessie L. Presswood of LGC AXIO Proficiency Testing. Jessie, welcome.
Thank you, Rachel. And hello, everybody. I am so excited to be here and have been loving all of these great thought leadership presentations. As Rachel said, my name is Jessie Presswood, here with LGC AXIO to talk to you all today about the thrilling topic of proficiency testing, what PT is and why you need it. Next slide, please. So most of you are familiar with the laboratory ISO standard of 17025. Well, the PT provider equivalent that we at LGC are accredited to is ISO 17043. And 17043 defines PT as an evaluation of participant performance against pre-established criteria by means of interlaboratory comparisons. So in layman's terms, PT is a measurement of your laboratory or facility's testing accuracy that is determined through comparisons with other laboratories conducting the same tests. I've been very fortunate to work with many SQF certified sites on their PT plans, and the majority see PT as a hurdle to jump through to maintain their certification. But I really encourage you to embrace PT as a powerful quality and safety tool. By the end of these 5 minutes, you will see how participating in a regular and accredited PT program will benefit your organization. Next slide, please. So now all of you will be familiar with what SQF has to say about PT, but just as a quick refresher, in 2.4.4.2 of SQF Edition 9, it does state that where internal laboratories are used to conduct input, environmental or product analyses, samples and testing methods shall be in accordance with the applicable requirements of ISO 17025, which does require annual proficiency testing for staff conducting said analyses. Or if you're using an external lab, they should be accredited to ISO 17025. So of course, PT is important to have in place prior to your audits, but there's so much more useful information to gain from PT. Next slide, please. Many of you attending here today are responsible for overseeing quality and safety for your facility, or maybe even multiple facilities. By enrolling your site or sites in a robust PT program, you will be able to monitor and improve the quality of your laboratory's measurements through the data provided in your reports. Through this data, you receive a comprehensive snapshot of your lab's performance on any given day. Next slide, please. So there are many PT providers to choose from, and the main takeaway point from this session is that you should be doing proficiency testing regardless of who your provider is. That being said, we at LGC would love to work with you. We are the preferred provider for top food and beverage brands all over the world, serving well over 13,000 laboratories annually. So when you are receiving your interlaboratory comparison data, you know you're receiving a truly global picture of your lab's performance. LGC AXIO offers a comprehensive catalog of samples. So our motto is that anything your lab is testing, we have a PT for that. If you have specific questions about your organization's testing needs or about PT in general, make sure to shoot me a message, or you can attend my Ask the Expert session today at 1:45, just right after this session. And I would love to answer all of your burning proficiency testing questions. Thank you all, and back over to you, Rachel.
Awesome stuff, Jesse. You are the proficiency testing expert. I love the Ask the Expert session too. We'll see you there. But first, now let's head to Megan Murphy from Eurofins Food Assurance, where Megan's going to be talking all things food labeling compliance solutions. Welcome, Megan.
Thanks, Rachel. And hi, everyone. First, I want to say that I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of you today. You probably know Eurofins best as SQF certification auditing capabilities, but did you know that we are also a food labeling service provider? Next. I would like to share with you 4 ways a food regulatory labeling service provider can meet SQF Edition 9 requirements. Next, please. As we all know, the food supply chain is very complex. Couple this with ever-changing food labeling requirements, and it's easy to see how it can become difficult for the food industry to understand and comply with regulatory requirements, especially when we need to consider government requirements, audit scheme requirements, as well as customer expectations. A failure to meet mandatory requirements can have serious consequences, including nonconformance, certificate suspension or withdrawal, product recalls, financial burden and brand damage, as well as public health implications. Next, please. SQF has built labeling requirements into their food safety code. In section 2.3.1.6, we find that records of label compliance for all new and existing products shall be maintained. So for food manufacturers that don't have the capabilities in-house for creating and maintaining labeling compliance records, contracting Eurofins or a third-party provider can be really beneficial. They can supply in-house records that offer comprehensive review and record of your label compliance. In section 2.4.7.2, we find that product labels shall comply with the food legislation that applies in the country of manufacture, as well as the country or countries of use or sale. So once an organization is moving from domestic to international food sales, complying with required regulations becomes exceptionally more complex. So it's important to have food labeling expertise, as well as an expert on customs and border control requirements. So using a global labeling service provider will allow you access to the expertise of a global network of consultants. And these consultants can review labels and meet acceptability requirements. Next, please. In section 2.4.1.1, we find that the site shall ensure that at the time of delivery to customers, finished products shall comply with the food safety legislation applicable in the country of manufacture and sale. This includes compliance with legislation requirements applicable to product design, net weights, nutrition, allergen and additive labeling, and labeling of identity preserved foods. This would be another instance where if you don't have in-house capabilities to perform regulatory compliance review, you can utilize a third party to conduct these reviews. They can ensure accuracy in all of these areas. Next, please. There are 4 common mistakes that lead to food labels not meeting regulatory requirements. So before you finalize your label, you may want to ask yourself the following questions. Are you using the correct NFP format? Are you still confused about whether your products require dual nutrition fact panels? Do you need help with calculating or testing nutritional analysis? And are your claims validated and declared on the label? If you need support determining if you are meeting the requirements, contact a food regulatory consultant or a third-party regulatory label review service. I want to thank all of you for attending. If you have any questions, make sure you visit me in the community exchange. You can also reach me anytime on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to help. So So I hope you have a great SQF conference and a great rest of the day.
Thank you so much, Megan. And wow, these 5x5s are flying by. And next up, we've got Karen Everstein from Food Chain ID, talking all things leveraging data to predict and mitigate supply chain food safety risks. Take it away, Karen.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Karen Everstein. I'm with the Food Safety Solutions Group at Food Chain ID, and I'm standing in for Gary Smith today. Food Chain ID is a global company offering certification, supply chain risk assessment, and training and consulting services. We support food companies in over 100 countries. I'm excited to share some of our data looking at the food supply risks from the first part of 2021. The two data sources we will look at are the Food Fraud Database and Horizon Scan. The Food Fraud Database is an industry-leading tool that supports GFSI-required vulnerability assessments of food fraud, otherwise known as economically motivated adulteration. It currently has more than 13,500 global records related to fraud risk. Horizon Scan was developed by top scientists at FARA, formerly the Food and Environment Research Agency in the UK, and it provides web-based searching of food safety notifications and supply chain risks. Food Chain ID is the source of Horizon Scan data and analysis in the US. For this presentation, we're going to look at what the data reveals as food supply chains adjusted following the height of COVID. Looking forward, we want to explore what we can learn from the trends of supply chain threats, since data-driven supply chain risk assessment is critical for mitigating and preventing food safety issues. So the first set of data we will look at comes from Horizon Scan, which is a comprehensive data source based on government notifications of food safety supply chain issues. In the first 6 months of 2021, there were more than 8,800 new reports and 3,300 recalls globally. You can see that pesticides, microbiological contaminants, and allergens were the top sources of hazard reports as a percentage of the total. My apologies for not asking for the slide to be moved forward, but I see that it was moved, so thank you. So we can move to the next slide. So if we look specifically at pesticides, we see that ethylene oxide dominated the pesticide notifications. In the US, ethylene oxide is an EPA-registered antimicrobial pesticide, but its use for disinfection of food is not permitted in Europe. EPA considers ethylene oxide critical for sterilizing medical equipment and necessary to protect public health. It is also a principal method used to reduce bacterial levels in herbs and spices. The spice industry estimated that approximately 32% of herbs and whole spices are treated with ethylene oxide annually. Ethylene oxide alerts started in 2020 with notifications about sesame seed contamination, and alerts expanded in 2021. Recent notifications have included materials such as locust bean gum, xanthan gum, cayenne pepper, lentils, ginger, pomegranate powder, and various supplements. Next slide. Here we're looking at fraud reports from the Food Fraud Database from January through August 2021. Seafood, meats, dairy, honey, and herbs and spices have figured prominently in fraud reports this year. There's also been quite a bit of fraud reported in botanicals and supplements, as well as alcoholic beverages. Over the past year and a half, there have been pressures on food ingredient supply chains that have increased the vulnerability to fraud. These pressures have come from increased consumer demands for particular products, combined with supply disruptions and transportation challenges. Raw material shortages have prompted adjustments in suppliers and source countries and may have increased the reliance on new suppliers and/or brokers. As supply chains continue to be affected by the COVID pandemic, it's worthwhile to pay particular attention to incoming raw materials in those areas, especially if you are sourcing from a new or not yet established supplier. And finally, undeclared allergens continue to be the #1 reason for food recalls. It's estimated that 32 million people in the United States suffer from food allergies, and unintentional consumption is a serious health risk. This chart shows the top undeclared allergens in 2021 so far. As most of you probably know, sesame was recently added to the list of allergens that must be labeled on food packaging, making it the 9th such required allergen for US labels. In conclusion, next slide, looking at data from Horizon Scan and the Food Fraud Database, we can see that notifications for pesticides, surpassed those for microbiological contaminants as compared to previous years due to ongoing ethylene oxide notifications. Food fraud is a continuing risk and vulnerability remains high due to supply chain pressures. Milk and multiple allergens were the top allergens reported for recalls so far this year. Going forward, it's important to continue to monitor both supplier and ingredient risks, ensure that you have strong supplier onboarding programs, put in place additional measures for ingredients sourced from new suppliers and/or brokers, and monitor verified sources of data on current government notifications as well as historical risk. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference, and back to you, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Karen, and bravo. Absolutely bravo. Thanks for filling in for Gary. Next up, we've got our friend Frank Schurz of SCS Global Services for 5 ways to improve your audit experience with your auditor and certification body. Take it away, Frank.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, so I thought this 5x5 was a unique time to list 5 ways to improve your audit experience. And I'm coming at this from a couple of different angles. Had the opportunity to sit and be a member of the SQF technical team for the last 5 years, and so saw a lot of appeals and complaints, unfortunately. One appeal or complaint is too many. And so saw the reasons for those, and they all come back to just making sure the auditor and the site are on the same page. Also had the opportunity of training SQF auditors in the SQF auditor courses. And so a lot of this messaging that I have today is similar to what we do and how we train auditors up front. But, training an auditor does not make a good auditor. It starts with that, but it takes years of practice too. So let's launch in. So 5 ways to improve your audit experience. So this is both for the auditors in the audience as well as the SQF practitioners. Next slide, please. Okay, first one, really easy, document preparation. So this all happens before the audit. So the auditor or the CB is required to send you an agenda that this is how we're going to do the audit. Typically, those agendas are canned. They're always the same. They never change. They should reflect your operations. So for the site, make sure that it's specific to your operations. So if you need to schedule a third shift or an off shift, sanitation inspection, make sure that's in that agenda and that it reflects that so you can align your resources. And that's the key behind that, is aligning your resources to the scope of the operation and making sure everything's in there. You shouldn't be hiding any rooms or any secret sauce preparation areas. It needs to be all very transparent to the auditor. So let's start there. Let's make sure you know what you're getting audited to. The auditor knows that. They've got the agenda thing. The last thing you need is the auditor running out the door with a 5-minute closing session because he or she is trying to catch a plane. So that may be their fault, maybe yours. But let's make sure we're on the same page to that. Also agree to a list of documents to review. Again, making sure that front, the advent of off-site documentation reviews, which was always there but not used that much. So COVID allowed us to do that. I would take advantage of that. Let's get through and look at procedures and SOPs and all those other things up front. Always good for the auditor. So if you can do that, great. If you're not doing that and it's all being done, let's be prepared. So the auditor knows what they want to look at specifically, and you are going to have that available to him or her. So next slide. Second one, senior management participation. Easier said than done. So presence at opening and closing meetings, okay? It says the senior management person. That isn't always available, but if I've seen sometimes great participation just by, hey, I've got an offsite meeting, I can't make it in person, but I'm going to dial in or something like that. So we want to see the effort because, that's part of that management commitment piece that the auditor is evaluating, and they want to make sure that that's there. So if you're the practitioner, make sure you got those resources aligned up. They know what's coming down the pipeline. And auditors, be open to different ways of that, making sure if somebody isn't available, they're on vacation, they have their backup. It's a good time to check on that org chart to see who all the responsibilities in. And then schedule some time. auditor schedule time to meet and assess with the auditor or with the management in order to assess their commitment. And one way to do that is just talk to them. So we really encourage you to do that. Okay, next way to do that, listen to each other. So many times when we would get these, or not we, I say we because I used to be with SQF, when Tammy now gets these complaints and or appeals, a lot of it comes down to what the auditor is asking for and what the site assumes they're asking for. It's not being listened to. The auditor doesn't listen to the response. The site doesn't listen to the question and says, no, I don't got that, when they really do have it. So in the auditor, just be prepared to ask those questions in different ways. You are the communicator. It's your job as the auditor to make sure that they understand what you're asking. And so if they don't get it the first time around, try it in different ways. It's so important to make sure you give them every opportunity for them to tell their story on how they're assessing risk or managing risk. Not something that you think you heard, but you definitely heard and you saw firsthand or through evidence. The auditee, if you don't understand what they're asking, ask again. Just make sure that you're clear on that before you say yay or nay, or hey, this is how we do it. And make sure you have that opportunity to tell your story and why it works for you. It's your program. If you need to be able to explain that to the auditor clearly and concisely so they know that you have the confidence in that. Next one. I'm running out of time. I got two more. Next slide, please. Show and tell. Auditors, be comfortable spending lots of time auditing or observing the process and the people. Be out there in the plant, watch what's going on, compare the actions and activities to SOPs and procedures. Auditees, embrace letting the auditor see everything. It's okay if they stand there for 10 or 15 minutes. You shouldn't have anything to hide. Let them see the dirty laundry or whatever it is, and let them assess that. And then ask the auditor to let you know when you may be seeing something of concern. You want to see it when they see it. So if they've got their brow all 5 lines up on their forehead like that, you better be asking why. And the last one, next slide, please. Don't rush that closing meeting. This goes for both sides of the coin. Auditors, make sure you get time to review those non-conformances. Make sure they're clearly articulated. It may not be precisely how you write them in the report, but it's got to be clear enough that the site understands what they are. And set the stage by thanking them for their time and hospitality. If you do it right, they'll be thanking you when you leave, thanking you for your observations and, more importantly, your non-conformances. And be clear with those. But the expectations on how what your expectations are for the site to close those NCs. Be very, very clear. And the auditor, avoid the conflicts. Work with the auditor, be transparent, and in the end, you'll get a good audit. And a good audit isn't necessarily a good score. It's just a good audit when both of you have an opportunity to communicate. Thank you very much. Back to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Frank, and thanks for the 5 tips. It always is helpful. Next up, we've got benefits of automating the audit process, presented by Shamanique Schrick of Safety Chain Software. Welcome to the virtual stage, Shamanique.
Hi, thank you for having me today. Today, I'm going to be discussing benefits of automating your audit process. Next slide, please. So we're going to briefly cover implementation, real-time visibility, and how that contributes to your audit readiness. You can really start reaping benefits during your implementation process, and that's going to eventually translate to you being audit ready 24/7 when you're deploying a technology to maintain all of your audit certification requirements. It's going to greatly help to reduce your administrative burden. And that's really important, especially in a time where resources are scarce and regulations are getting more stringent. So next slide, please. The first step during your implementation, you're going to be able to streamline your processes. By the time you get to, you selected a software solution, you want to make sure that you're getting your money's worth. So you're going to evaluate all of the processes that go into that will be audited, so that you can make sure that you are implementing good processes. So that means that you can cut out processes that are no longer relevant. You can streamline your checks that you're performing and things like that. You just want to make sure that what you put in will give you good data coming out, because you spent all this time and money on a software solution. So you want to make sure that you're getting the most out of it. Next slide, please. So the first benefit of automating your audit process would be real-time visibility. You're able to track performance to pursue continuous improvement, and that's going to enhance your operational efficiency. And this will allow you to optimize your resources so you can do more with less. And then you'll also have real-time alerts for record completion and important KPIs. So with your software, you'll be able to track those KPIs and make strategic decisions to improve in any areas as needed. Automating your task reduces the workload for your FSQA teams while also catching risks in the earliest possible stage, because you'll be able to identify and manage issues earlier with your real-time nonconformance alerts. So you'll have a constant look at compliance to your program standards, and your instant nonconformance alerts will allow for timely corrections and documented CAPAs. You can get those things started immediately. Being able to fill out your paperwork real time is a real time saver in the long term, because we've all been there where an auditor has asked for a piece of paper or a document and it's not filled out properly. And you don't know that until you're sitting there in the audit. Having a solution and automating your process will prevent that from even happening in the future. Next slide, please. The second benefit to automating your audit process would be your overall audit readiness, because you're reducing your administrative burden. Your audit prep time will significantly decrease, and you'll be able to focus more on actively improving your processes and being audit ready 24/7. This is just an example of the paperwork that people are responsible for verifying after the fact. We've seen that you can spend 13 plus hours throughout your facility verifying paperwork per week, but with an automated process, because you're enforcing compliance continuously, those verifications can be completed in real time. You don't have to wait for those forms to go from desk to desk or person to person. That greatly reduces the amount of time that you need to review those documents. Because you're automating your process, you're going to have a single centralized repository. So storing that data simplifies searching and analyzing. And so you'll be able to query all of your records, and also you'll be able to look at trends in real time. That's one thing that I know that a lot of people, you collect things on paper, and then when it's time to look at trends, no one else has time to put that back into Excel to even look at the trends to see what your data is telling you. You collect it, and you only look at it if and when there's a problem, instead of looking at it in real time. All of your records, data, and documents are going to be housed in a centralized system. So that means you will be audit ready 24/7. I think I'm wrapping up now. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it. And I hope you enjoyed the conference.
Thank you so much, Sean Monique. Well done. And all of those hours saved, inspiring. I love it. So now let us welcome back to the virtual stage Tracy Sheehan. And from Mario NutraSciences, Tracy's going to share with us how to protect supply chain integrity using ingredient standards. Welcome back, Tracy.
Thanks, Rachel, and good to be here. Next slide, please. So one of the things we look at is how supply chain issues can impact ingredients. It's really a global issue, what's going on today and in the past few years. Not only do you have issues with food fraud, like this graph shows sort of the major food fraud issues where there's misrepresentation of food, but you have food safety issues. I think the key is knowing where those are and making sure that your specifications are a preventive control. And we'll talk about a couple different ideas to help you out of there. Next slide. So if you look at SQF, section 2.3.2.3, all raw materials and packaging and ingredients, including those received from other sites under the same corporate ownership, shall comply with specifications and the relevant legislation in the country of manufacture and the countries of destination. And this can be very challenging for large global food companies that are buying ingredients around the world and they're shipping product around the world. There's some tools like a limit detector that can give you information on what the limits are for food safety issues around the world. Let's say you're buying grains, and the aflatoxin limit is different in the US versus the EU, and then you're shipping it to Australia, you want to look at the variation between those countries so that you're buying the grain in the safest way, but also when you make it into a food that you're still meeting the regulations of the company that you're shipping to. So this software can help out with that. Next slide. When you're building your specifications, you want to look at all the ingredient risks. I do recommend the Food Chemical Codex. They have monographs on ingredients, and they're very good at what the requirements should be, and you can add those into your specification. You can look at food fraud reports like this one on olive oil. Many of you have heard that apparently the extra virgin olive oil is not always what it says it is. So, how can you put in specifications, including testing requirements, to make sure that you're getting what you're paying for? And then you also always want to include the hazards of concern. So, are there pathogens that are at risk for these ingredients? Are there chemicals like allergens, mycotoxins, pesticides? For the country of import, manufacturer, and export countries? Or is there farm material requirements that you want to put into your specification? You want to make sure that it's encompassing everything that you see as a hazard for that ingredient. Next slide. And you want to check that ingredient integrity. And I'll just give some examples. You can add quality expectations to specifications, things like color and odor and flavor. Flavor, you want to make sure that's for ready-to-eat ingredients only. And let's say you're buying chocolate and you want a certain flavor profile, you can check for that. But you want the receiving person to be able to understand what the color and odor of that material should look like so they can check at receiving. I think it's best practice to include a picture of the ingredient label in the specification so the ingredient receiver can check against what that ingredient label is supposed to be. You want to make sure you understand the shelf life of the ingredient, not only the shelf life based on quality, like rancidity, but also based on food safety. So, will the ingredient expire and become unsafe? And you want to make sure that's included in your specification. You can leverage receiving staff to check that ingredient integrity by either visual observation. It's always good to check for damaged trailers, make sure the trailers are locked or the pallets. Confirm the correct label and the lot codes. You can do a color and odor check, and then sample and test for food safety and quality. I had an experience one time as a food manufacturer where we rejected a load due to a problem that was a food safety problem, and it turns out that load went to someone else. So you also want to understand the implications of rejecting a load and make sure that the supplier has integrity of what they're going to do with it. Next slide. So the other part of the SQF requirements and solutions, I'll just use an example. You can hire a MirrorU or any other consultant to do a risk assessment of your ingredients. And when they do that, they can help you develop those specifications. You can use a safety HUD database that tracks all the recalls and food fraud events globally, or the limit detector that I mentioned that would have the limits of each of the ingredient for hazards of concern, as well as a link to the regulatory requirements and the methods to be able to detect those. There's a free 10-day trial for that that we're offering right now. So feel free to reach out to me or just click on the email attached. Next slide. And I'll turn it back to Rachel. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tracy. And thank you so much to MirrorU. Great information. And we're moving right along to the 7 questions to ask senior management about supporting the SQF program. Super important. Get those pens and pencils ready. We're welcoming back Joe Whelan and Ann Cooper from Eagle Certification Group.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for listening to us and putting up with our quick presentations today. We'll zoom through the 7 questions to ask senior management about food safety. Next slide, please. These questions, next slide too, can be used in many different ways. They can be used by internal auditors at your plant when they are evaluating management commitment. You can be asking these as an SQF practitioner when You are setting things up with senior management, setting expectations. And if you have new senior management, you can ask these questions as well. And the SQF auditor may ask these questions during an audit. So be prepared and be aware of what's coming down the road when the auditor shows up. I'm going to turn it over to Joe now, and we can go to the next slide.
Hey, everybody, good to see you again. After a lot of years of auditing, it's become clear to me that far too many auditors are reluctant to ask senior management about their SQF leadership, SQF buy-in, how they address culture, their personal involvement in establishing and maintaining a continually improving food safety program. This 5x5 is intended to highlight the importance of auditing senior management, as they are, as a few folks prior to our presentation have mentioned, they are critical to the success of any food safety or quality program. Now, I'll just tell you, the questions that I'm going to propose are just some of the questions to ask, but they certainly are not all the questions that hopefully you will ask. If we could have the first question, please. Why have you elected to do SQF for your company? What I'm hoping to not hear is we did SQF because our customers said they would no longer buy from us unless we were certified. We had to do SQF. Not necessarily a heartwarming there, but what I hope to hear from senior management is something like, well, we did it because we felt that it's important to protect our customers, our brand, and the bottom line. Next question. How do you motivate and encourage employees to make food safety a priority? This question I like to pose is somewhat targeted at the overall food safety program and what it must be amongst supervisors. And this topic came up earlier today, how important the supervisors are and employees, and how management must lead that program. Now, this question can go a lot of different directions, but what I listen for is a program that enhances food safety and now culture. Next question. What might I see, I, the auditor, on the shop floor that would tell me that a food safety culture is present? And here's where I start to look for how connected senior management is with employees and whether the program to enhance culture is gaining ground, along with how culture will be measured at your site. It's an interesting concept. Next question. How are the root cause and corrective action techniques working to prevent repeat occurrences? Now, I like to ask this question after I've audited the HACCP plan and corrective and preventive action. I'm looking for how senior management is supporting continual improvement via really good investigation, root cause definition, and corrective action training. Training being the operative word, because I'm not seeing a lot of corrective action training taking place. And what happens there, the proposed actions fall short of getting to the root cause. Next question. What is your role in the mock recall exercise? If the answer is, well, the SQF practitioner does all that, then my follow-up question is whether he or she, that senior manager, would consider participation if it was an actual recall. If they answer yes, then they have no reason to not practice in the mock. Number 6, next question. What is the food safety team working on based upon the last SQF management review? A senior manager, we've all said it, must be leading the food safety team and must know what the output of the management review is and where those priorities fall relative to the business of food safety. I want to hear what they know about management review output and what they're doing. Next question. Number 7 is, what do you learn from the monthly updates from the SQF practitioner, and is it valuable in minimizing food safety risks? Because some of the SQF monthly updates that I've audited and actually attended, and if I know they're going to be doing a monthly update that week, I build that into my schedule so I can sit in on that. But unfortunately, what I've heard is that some of these monthly updates are more about production efficiencies, meeting delivery dates, equipment that stopped working, so on and so forth. What I'm really interested in hearing is what the SQF practitioner is presenting and what senior management is doing with the monthly updates. So I hope these questions will drive you more comfortably into the offices of senior management. They're all on one piece of paper. So if you download this presentation, you'll have them and you can take them in there with you. We're out of time, so capture the contact information and the very best to you from the Eagle Certification Group from me and Ann.
Fantastic, Joe. Thank you so much. And those 7 questions, you know what's so cool is that I can see it pushing us forward, but also too reminding our leaders that, you know, those folks out there right now, auditors and practitioners, we are the experts really when it comes to advocating for SQF and safety. So thank you both so much, Joe and Ann. Let's give it up for Eagle Certification Group. And the time has come, our final 5x5. It's a little sad, but we're ending with a bang, hearing from Mark Morales of LRQA discussing food fraud, best practices for assessing vulnerability and mitigating risk. Take it away, Mark.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Morales, and I'm the Corporate Accounts Director at LRQA. Next slide, please. So as supply chains have become ever more integral to a consumer's perception of brand and consideration of product, it is important that manufacturers consider key elements when assessing food fraud vulnerability. In a recent global LRQA survey to senior executives across the food and beverage supply chain, we found that 97% of respondents reported having been affected by food fraud in the last 12 months, 80% agreeing that food fraud is a growing concern for their business. And only 22% of manufacturers were very confident that their suppliers meet food safety standards. In this 5 and 5, I will discuss what are the top 5 key elements of the food and beverage supply chain that manufacturers need to consider when assessing food fraud vulnerability. Starting with number 1, counterfeit products. Counterfeit products are products and packaging that are copied without safeguards and standards of the genuine product itself. While no products are safe from counterfeiting, this is more common when there are large price variances amongst competing products, such as, mentioned earlier, wine or extra virgin olive oil. Most of the time, financial gain is what incentivizes these criminals and criminal organizations. Next slide, please. The second element is adulteration. Downstream sourcing has become further complicated during COVID, as with everything else, making it harder to justify or to identify adulteration. Adulteration is the intentional substitution or addition of a substance to extend or increase the value of a raw material or product. Beyond eroding consumer confidence, adulteration in food can cause significant public health consequences, create widespread public fear, disrupt trade, and increase food insecurity. Next slide, please. The third element is factory access. With over 70% of manufacturers having to have changed their suppliers as a direct result of the pandemic, how access is maintained at a factory level is becoming more and more important. Making sure you have badging access, locks, secure shipping space, and even how you're vetting truck drivers coming into your facilities is all now very important when ensuring your management system is robust enough for today's environment. This is why factory access has been identified as a key element that manufacturers would need to consider when assessing food fraud vulnerability. Next slide, please. The fourth element, proprietary packaging. Packaging has become such an integral part of the consumer experience, and even more so specifically in the beverage space. After all, we all know what a 20-ounce Coca-Cola bottle looks like. With the ease of having almost any product delivered to your door, make sure you take a closer look at packaging, as this is another key element in food and beverage fraud. Packaging usually occurs once the product has left the manufacturing facility, so safety measures must be in place in order to reduce the likelihood of packaging fraud occurring, even when the product is no longer in possession. Next slide, please. And the fifth, but not final element, transportation integrity. Speaking of at-home delivery, as this demand increases, questions about whose responsibility it is for the integrity during transportation have been raised. The reality is the entire supply chain needs to take ownership, although the brands themselves would have the most to lose. Identifying these elements is only the start. This is why LRQA typically proposes a workshop with our clients and sector specialists, helping to develop a plan around the specific risks to your business based on the current environment and your goals. To learn more about how to reduce this risk as well as other considerations, please reach out to myself or one of my colleagues in attendance. We at LRQA look forward to the rest of the conference and working with you all to mitigate your safety and quality risks. These are the top 5 food and beverage fraud elements that manufacturers need to consider when assessing food fraud vulnerability. My name is Mark Morales, Corporate Accounts Director at LRQA, and that was my 5 and 5. Back to you, Rachel.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. And thank you so much, Mark. Thank you so much to all of our incredible speakers. And you know what, Mark, as you were talking and bringing up that food packaging, I thought of my favorite bottles at my grandparents' house. I don't know if anybody else enjoyed it, but the Clearly Canadian. The second I saw those blue metallic caps and those cool glass bottles as a kid, it was officially vacation time. So thanks for sharing your expertise. And as Mark mentioned, all of our speakers are available. They're open knowledge folks just here waiting for you to help support, and the fun does not stop here. So congrats and thanks again to all of our 5x5 speakers. As we roll in, well, we've got our knowledge swaps starting at 2:15 Eastern. And these knowledge swaps, they are a conversation, not a presentation, okay? We have 27, that's right, 27 virtual rooms covering 22 different food sector categories. And during these conversations, I mean, we can talk about everything from food sector packaging to dairy food processing, confectionery manufacturing. Anyone? I could go for it. Let's meet there. And, turn on your videos, unmute yourself. These are conversations. These are places that are safe, where folks understand and you're willing and able to share your feedback, to encourage each other and to share best practices as well as ask questions. It's a chance to get to know each other and, yes, commiserate a little bit too. So listen, some of the food sector categories, they do have more than one room. So we've thought this through. If one is busy or full, just head over to the next one. You're totally good. We've got a ton of different options and we can't wait to see you there. Day 2, we're rocking, we're rolling, we are moving right forward. SQF Unites 2021. My name's Rachel Sheeran and I'll see you in the knowledge swaps.